We're the Stephen Queens. I'm Bella.
I'm Shannon.
And I'm Ashley.
We just wanted to thank everybody for joining us again for the second episode and all of the support that we got. We are so thankful to you. We do have a couple shout outs.
We do. So before we get started, we have a couple shout outs that we want to give. These few are from me. For those of you who maybe do not know, my mother passed away literally on the day our first podcast premiered. So that has been very hectic for me. So first and foremost, I want to give the biggest shout out to Shannon and Bella. You guys really, if you don't know me, I'm a little bit of a control freak, a lot of bit of a control freak. And Bella and Shannon just really picked up where I had dropped the ball and just absolutely ran with it. I mean, we wouldn't even have our first episode debuted if it wasn't for them. And they've stayed up to date on social media and everything. So seriously, a huge shout out to both of you for all of your help and support through all of that. I'll never be able to repay you for that. Seriously, it means the absolute world.
Well, we love you and we love Mary, so we were happy to do it, honestly.
Thank you.
100%.
Thank you. Another shout out to all the friends who tuned in and listened to this podcast because of my mom. She was one of the biggest supporters of us. I mean, even when we were just talking about it and it was just an idea in our heads, she was 100% our biggest supporter, our biggest advocate, was so excited that we were doing this and even called it our passion project. And I can't even put into words how excited and how supportive she was. So thank you to everyone who tuned in because of her posts or because of hearing her listening to the post or our episode. The first episode we ever aired was it was literally the last thing she and I did together. So it really means a lot to me. A huge shout out to the DCP crew for their wonderful shout out memento to my mom. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in because of that. It really means the absolute world to me. And I think also to Bella and Shannon, not to speak for them.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing all that, Ashley. I'm really glad that we're continuing this, as your mom said, the passion project. It's really what we all love. And with that being said, I think we also talked about this. I think this episode goes out to Mary.
Yes, most definitely.
Thank
the Queen of Halloween.
Which is ironic because that's what we're doing today. It's Halloween. But before we dive into that, how many podcasts have to do a corrections episode on their second freaking episode?
Us.
Just us, because we're just a bunch of goobers. So corrections corner for us. This one I'm taking the blame for. I had a lot going on, obviously, and the director of The Silence of the Lambs is not Jonathan Demme. That is not how you pronounce his name. I Googled it just to make sure I was right. The first thing that popped up said Demme, so I was like, okay, great, this is how you say it. Well, I should have looked at the other 500 million ways of how to say it, because it's Jonathan Demme, because I am an idiot.
No, you're not. No, you're not. None of us knew either, but the funny thing is that you were just saying the reason how we found this out was because Laszlo from the Death Curse podcast, the DCP crew, tweeted saying, I didn't realize I was saying his name wrong this whole time, and we just thought that was hilarious because he didn't even question us. He was just like, well, crap.
Yep, that's wrong. How it is. As soon as he said that, I was like, oh crap, did I say that wrong? I did.
Thank you for your unwavering faith in us, Laszlo. That really means a lot.
Hey, Laszlo.
That wasn't even me.
That was actually Ashley this time, not Bella. I feel like next time it's my turn.
There we go. I think with that, I think we're ready to dive into Halloween.
Agreed. Yep. 1978 Halloween classic.
Right. So Halloween was released in 1978 and directed and scored by John Carpenter. I promise that's how you say his last name. It stars Jamie Lee Curtis in her film debut. Halloween is ranked number 68 on the American Film Institute's TV program 100 Years, 100 Thrills, and is given a 7.8 out of 10 stars on IMDb. The genre is considered slasher. So a little synopsis for us. We open on Halloween, 1963. The police are called to 43 Lambkin Lane, only to discover that 6-year-old Michael Myers has stabbed his teenage sister to death. After being institutionalized for 15 years, Michael breaks out on the night before Halloween. The only person who seems to be concerned by this is Myers' psychiatrist, Dr. Loomis, who thinks Michael is coming back to his hometown of Haddonfield. Meanwhile, Laurie Strode and her friends find themselves being followed by a mysterious figure that they chalk up to Halloween antics. Little do they know what sort of evening they are in for.
Spooky.
Yep, great kickoff to, I don't know, is spooky season just October? I consider it September through Halloween, personally, because I just want to extend it.
Spooky season for me is literally the day after 4th of July through November. So
Every season.
Okay.
Is spooky season.
Yes, well, that's the thing, is that I watch scary movies all the time, but there's a certain time when it just hits different, you know?
Yes.
it's true.
Okay. We have a lot to touch on with this, and before we start, we all agree this is a classic, and it definitely has merit in the horror movie / just movie world. However, and I'm not saying I don't give it credit for that, there are some things we sort of rag on it a little bit about, which we're going to get into. Halloween stands, understand we're not trying to totally just crap on it the whole time.
The film history buff, film history fan that I am, this film studies wise set the scene for slasher films moving forward. So I have a lot of respect for Halloween, although there are a lot of things that are very dated about it that we will get into and discuss. I do acknowledge that it is a classic, a staple, and really set the scene for so many slasher films moving forward.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the first thing that we probably should touch on is this monsterization of mental illness, and a lot of horror films, not even just Halloween, horror films to this day and before Halloween have this way of where they take people who suffer from mental illness and use that to make them the villains in the film. For example, in this film, the nurse and Dr. Loomis, as they're driving up to the psychiatric hospital or the institution, Dr. Loomis, it keeps referring to Michael as it, and the nurse is talking about the gibberish that the patients speak. And when they see all of the patients out on the open lawn, she says, since when did they let them wander around? Not even really referring to them as patients or people, just kind of like them as less than human in a way.
I absolutely agree with that. I did notice the way that they spoke about those humans was very, like we said, they dehumanized them. And that, for me, sets the tone where we villainize mental illness in the real world as well, not just horror movies. And clearly that's problematic.
Yeah, I know that there are a lot of issues in other countries in the past where people who have special needs are extremely neglected in homes, and the caretakers rarely attend to them. So to implement this into a horror movie as a shock factor it's a little insensitive, but I do see where they are going with Michael being in a facility. There is also a lot saying that he isn't suffering from a mental illness, that this is some sort of monster who happens to have a human form. And Dr. Loomis at one point in the movie says, this isn't a man.
He even does say that he doesn't see anything human behind his eyes, which when we look at him, Michael, when he is 6 years old and he's just killed his own sister, which we'll go more into that later, it's interesting because, the parents' reactions as well to that killing, I mean, I wouldn't really call that human either.
Oh, Michael!
Right, so I'm like, what does it take to be human? Like Dr. Loomis, who dehumanizes these people and treats women disrespectfully, in my opinion, the nurse, he cuts her off completely at one point. So, I mean, when we look at what makes you human, I mean, that can too be debated with how Dr. Loomis acts as well.
No, that's really accurate, Shannon. That's 100% accurate. I found this article online. It's a website called Little White Lies, Truth in Movies. And the article I found is called How Halloween Stoked Our Fears and Misunderstandings of Mental Illness. It's by Fraser McDonald. And here he says, when a director wants to show a character's mental illness, they usually portray them as quiet or mute, socially withdrawn, or else showing a complete lack of interest in others, as Michael does, obviously. This says a lot, of course, not only about a film's creator, but society as a whole. Mental illness is still viewed as something inherently wrong or threatening. In many horror films, mental illness is defined as introspective by nature and deeply private. It can never be fully explained, or rather won't be by the person suffering from it, and thus it's impossible to fully understand it. The director understands this and very often uses that to a less than altruistic end, which I think is 1,000% used in this film. And he also goes to say that in another instance of mental illness being used is as a fear tactic, much like it was in Carpenter's original film and so many other of the films it has inspired. It's a tired trope, one that appears to be going nowhere in horror, but one which the world at large could do without. And I think that really reflects back on this idea of humanity and all of that. I'm not saying Michael is a normal, good person. Obviously, he's not. No one just stabs their sister out of nowhere, and no one decides to kill a bunch of teenagers, as annoying as they can be sometimes. That's not a normal thing to do. But obviously, there's something wrong with Michael, but I think that kind of goes into what Bella was saying about him not being human and going farther into it. I just think sometimes the way that they're portraying it as just his mental illness can be very demonizing to the mental illness community, I guess is what I'm going to phrase it as someone who has depression and anxiety, which is on the low end of mental illness. Understanding mental illness as the community of people who have it, it's very demonizing to them.
Yes, I think also in the movie, they don't ever give him a diagnosis. That's the one thing. So they're never saying his diagnosis. Also, a lot of times when, at least from what I've seen, I'm no investigator or don't know how everything works in regards to crime, but when somebody ends up stabbing someone or inflicting harm, there's things that lead up to this individual then performing this act. For example, Jeffrey Dahmer. He had a lot of social issues. He was killing and mutilating animals. He was putting them in acid. There was a lot of things that came before he ended up actually killing a human. In regards to this situation, I feel like they were really casual about their son coming out with a massive knife and blood all over him. It was almost like, oh, you did it again, or like, what did you do?
Oh, Gilly.
Yeah. It's the teacher in the Gilly skit from SNL saying, Gilly? Or like Urkel being like, did I do that? Like, it's just so looked over, and it's like, no, your child just killed somebody.
It's true. And I'm sorry. I know this is getting far too into it, but like a 6-year-old is going to have that much strength to stab somebody? That's crazy. Like that there's like psycho level like rah, rah, rah.
And I think having a 6-year-old kill somebody is plausible, but having a 6-year-old kill somebody who is clearly older, clearly able to take control of the situation more than the child is the issue.
Guys, I've realized I have been doing something wrong my entire life.
What's that?
What's that?
I didn't know that before you get ready for bed, you have to sit naked except for in your underwear and brush your hair. I didn't know that. I didn't know that's what you had to do.
You never knew that your hair
Wow.
is better brushed when you are in the nude.
I had no idea. I need to change that now, I guess. I guess I just always did it in my pajamas, not just basically naked. I'm going to fix that from now on.
I feel like part of it was her being like, wow, I just did this really super adult, cool thing. Meanwhile, the boy like literally left her house after like 5 minutes. Like,
Yeah. Also, she left the door open. obviously knew that her brother was in the house. I mean, there's a lot of issues in regards to that whole scene.
I think this really leads into another issue that we have, not just with Halloween, but with horror films in general, that the teenagers, the people, the characters in general who are usually killed are very sexually promiscuous. And that happens again and again. It's a common trope in horror films. But what I found really interesting, and one of my Ashley fun facts.
Ooh, I love these.
So the two writers, I guess, of the film, obviously John Carpenter, who first of all helped write, produce, direct, and score this film. So he's like total threat. Him and Deborah Hill, one of the other writers. She wrote most of the dialogue for the female characters. Fun fact. Fun fact within a fun fact. But both of them have said numerous times over the years that they did not consciously set out to depict virginity as a way of defeating a rampaging killer. The reason why all of the horny teens die is simply because they're so preoccupied with getting laid that they don't notice there's a killer at large. Where on the other hand, Lori spends a lot of her time on her own and therefore is more alert.
I'm going to say that I believe that that is a lot of internalized misogyny in a lot of horror films, that people don't realize that they are depicting women in this certain way. But I do believe that there's a lot of internal misogyny in Halloween and the way that the women are killed. Absolutely, which we can go into more. But I do agree with you where the sexualization of young people or teenagers being shown as just being sinful and vengeful figure coming down to punish them for it. A lot of people have said that this also reflects the way that people felt politically back during the 70s, 80s. The religious right was becoming, with Ronald Reagan, President Reagan was becoming a lot more prominent. And, the moralistic kind of way of life was becoming seen as the way to live, whereas diverging from that and being sexually promiscuous or acting in certain ways, like even Lori, that scene where she's smoking weed in the car, that almost shows, well, right after she smokes weed, yes, Michael was stalking her, but now she's officially on the table as a victim, even though you can tell that she's very inexperienced about it and is uncomfortable with it, but she does it anyway. And that scene to me actually made her character have more depth. And made her a bit more dynamic instead of just being the goody-goody. So I mean, I'm not saying I condone that, but I also say, well, I like that they added that in for her character and her character development. But then it also, she wasn't just the goody-goody anymore, and now, she's gonna die. Or maybe not.
Yeah, so the movie Halloween, from what I've seen throughout my research, is Halloween started the theme of have sex and die. So anybody who's engaging in sex is like automatically going to die.
10,000%. I mean, this film in itself is oftentimes been cited as an allegory on the virtue of sexual purity and the danger of casual sex. And yes, while this wasn't necessarily Carpenter's intent, he wasn't, intending to make some sort of moral statement. I think maybe even subconsciously internalized, he may have been. And again, I'm not John Carpenter. I can't speak for him. But as a director, I think it just shows how much power and influence you can have. Because after doing this film, I'm not saying it never happened before Halloween, but since Halloween, it has been a common trope in almost every single horror movie. I mean, even Cabin in the Woods even makes fun of it, about how,
right,
spoiler alert, the quote-unquote virgin has to die at the end, and when that isn't what necessarily happens, the whole thing is thrown off. So it's just this common trope that literally everyone knows, and it's so commonplace everywhere.
Going off of what you said about, I 1000% agree. So we can't speak for him, and he might not have intended that, but we absolutely can speak to the effect that had on American cinema and horror cinema in general, and just how they make women, I believe, seem more provocative, and how they demonize that. And how, if we look into how the women are portrayed here, so we look at Linda and Annie. neither of those women, we were talking about how we almost didn't even remember their names. That's how absolutely shallow those characters are. And they are just sexual symbols meant to be victims because of that, and not worthy of living a life where they're deemed as valuable because all they want to do is have sex. And in my opinion, if a horror movie has to bank on that, killing the sexually promiscuous teenagers, I don't know how much I can say that I believe it's, you know, a movie that I want to watch. I mean, of course there will be consequences to having sex, but normally it's not getting killed by a vicious murderer.
10,000%. And that was the other thing that kind of was a big thing with me, is another kind of common trope that I've seen in several horror films, including Halloween, is the other female characters, or the main characters, the main protagonist's friends, all kind of suck. Annie was killed, Linda was killed. I'm just like, okay, it's kind of scary. Am I supposed to care? They're crappy friends. They don't do anything for her. They do nothing but make fun of her. Am I supposed to care that they died? I mean, I know morally I should care, but, you know, in relating to what Shannon said, I literally had to go up and look to see who was who. I've seen this movie a couple times. I just did not care enough about them to necessarily care about their deaths, and I think that just is really unfortunate.
So coming out of the whole talk of sex in this movie, I think there's one thing that when I watched it this time, like most recently, I did not realize. And I think you guys know what I'm going to hit on, because it is so disturbing and bothersome. And it is when Bob and Linda
Yes.
are in. I honestly can't even remember her name because she's so irrelevant.
Solidifies our point, or Ashley's point.
Bella was literally rewatched this and immediately texted us about this. Is like, she was serious about it.
Then I got to that part and I was like, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's disturbing.
I was fuming. Okay, so when Bob and Linda are in the van, drinking and driving, which don't do that. Please don't. I mean, there's no reason. If you're drunk and you need to get home, get an Uber. What you do.
They didn't have Ubers, but they definitely had taxis, and they were within walking distance, I think.
But they're also in high school. Don't drink when you're in high school. Don't do it.
To all of my students, I do not condone drinking or smoking weed or promiscuous activity. That's
until you're 80.
Until you are old and wrinkly and disgusting. Actually, that doesn't mean you're old and wrinkly and disgusting. I'm sorry. Ageism is a thing.
Just wait till you're older. It's fine. You have a whole life to live. Just wait. Just
30.
Yeah. And then you'll hit 21 and you won't even drink like me. But what happens in the van is Bob and Linda are talking about how they're about to, you know, get it on. And they're talking about how they want to go in and rip each other's clothes off. And Bob says, after saying Annie would distract Lindsay, we go in and then we rip Lindsay's clothes off. Lindsay is the young child that Annie is babysitting. I'm confused because wouldn't there be a reshoot if this was a Freudian slip?
Yeah, there are critics out there that say that this was just a slip or a mishap or not necessarily meant to happen. I wasn't able to find anything about John Carpenter commenting on it. So if anybody out there finds that, please send that our way. You know, I know this film had a low budget, but I also feel like if this was some sort of slip up or mess up, they would have just refilmed the scene. It seems like quite a large slip up just to let it fly and let it go into the film.
I completely agree. I feel like there's really no excuse for that to have been in there other than just sloppiness. Or, first of all, if it was intended, that's a big problem. Unintended, it's a big problem as well that they left it in there. So either way, it's just pretty gross. I mean, and to me, inexcusable.
Yeah, and I think a majority of us have all watched this movie multiple times. I just now recognize that this was a thing, because I was prepping and I was paying attention to details more than I would if I was watching this movie casually. And I heard that come out of his mouth and I just wanted to rip him a new one, even though obviously it's a movie and I cannot do that. But He
Michael
does get
Myers
whipped once.
did.
Yeah,
Ew.
Michael Myers, the only good kill that he did was on Bob.
Because he knows you can kill teenagers, but you will not kill little children.
Yeah.
Agreed. And also, I felt not bad at all when Bob died. First of all, the name Bob. I mean, okay, I guess sorry if any Bobs are listening, but I'm like generic, just like Linda and Annie, whatever.
Try
But Bob,
harder.
we have you try harder. So yeah, we have Bob, and he was just like hanging from the kitchen wall, and I thought, that looks like a pretty great Halloween decoration. That was the extent of what I thought about Bob dying.
Yeah. I was on board with that death, to be quite
Right.
honest.
Oh, Michael Myers. What I think is kind of crazy, though, in a way, about not just Bob's death, but Linda's death, all of the deaths, honestly, is when you watch Michael kill them, because he has this mask on, you cannot see his emotion or feeling behind it. And I think that is a common theme, not just within this movie, but within many movies about masks and this fear of the unknown. Because you cannot see Michael's face, you project your own fears and thoughts onto him and what he might look like. And I think that's just a common trope that this uses, not only with him being in the ghost sheet and whatever, but throughout the movie and all of the other Halloween movies and many other scary movies, is wearing a mask and this fear of the unknown, which is a total common trope, really big in film studies in general. But it's just a thing, something that I found really interesting.
So, a fun fact about the mask was that it was originally a Captain Kirk mask that they stretched it out, took the eyebrows off, and painted it white. Like, they didn't try to like make a new mask for this specific character. They're like, we'll just alter something that we can find in the store.
And they were torn between, another fun fact on top of that, because that's a really good one. They were torn between using that one and a clown mask, kind of as a throwback to the mask he wore when he stabbed his sister. But they ended up going with the William Shatner mask because it was so much more frightening and ambiguous. You know, the clown mask had like a smile on it, so it was like, okay, it's kind of creepy. But the mask that they picked, it was just so ambiguous. There was no feeling or emotion, which made it so much more creepy.
Those fun facts are so interesting to me, and I love that you brought that up, both of you. But Ashley, when you were saying that we project our fears onto his face, it's that blank white face. I found that really interesting, and I think there are a lot of traditional fears that this movie plays up on. To go into that, before I go into those, I do want to say, again, the English teacher in me really finds the color of the mask interesting because we most often associate black or darker colors with evil and white with purity. So the symbolism there is interesting to me because, again, when I look at humanity and I think they're saying this man is not human, to see a white mask goes against that for me. And so I see the purity, the innocence. You think about things like childhood or, again, just being pure or angelic. And so I find that really ironic. Actually, there are a lot of moments of irony in this movie, dramatic irony, which means that we know what's happening and the characters don't, which I can appreciate, as I think we all can appreciate in a sense. It does add to suspense, but I thought that was interesting. But what you were saying about projecting our fears and playing off of fears, you have a lot of things in this movie. So number one, he's unknown and he's always lurking, and you have that voyeuristic aspect. But then also another big part of this movie, where are the parents? The parents are gone. Probably they're out having fun at a Halloween party, which, to be fair, cool, see that. But also, I'm thinking that's another childhood fear of, you always think that you can look to your parents, or if you're lucky enough, you think you can look to your parents as a child. And in this movie, that is absolutely not the case for any. And I look at the teenage characters, yes, you're becoming young adults, but they're still kids to me. And so even they have to come into this role of protector and survivor. So I find that really fascinating.
So, a fun fact, not about the movie, but about moi. I have a ginormous fear of masks. I do not like anything that wears a mask, whether it be a mascot, whether it be those stupid things at Disney World. I can't get on board with that. And I think part of the reason why is you do not know what this person's expressions are. You don't know. You can tell a lot from looking at somebody's face, what they're feeling. I mean, I think a good example is right now we're in the middle of something where we all are required to wear masks. You better be wearing one.
Do it.
Do it.
It wears the masks on the face or else it gets phase 1 again.
Yes. But we are required to kind of like gather information just from people's eyes at this point in time, and to not have any ability to like recognize emotion on the face is not the best feeling.
So another Ashley fun fact, so going off of masks, John Carpenter's intent with the character of Michael Myers and wearing the mask is so that the audience would never and should never be able to relate to him. And I think that is kind of going off what you guys say. You aren't able to relate to that. You can't see what he's feeling, get an idea of what's going on behind his eyes and his head. And in that way, it prohibits you from relating to him. Even when the camera is in the point of view of Michael wearing the clown mask, stabbing his sister Judith, while technically you are seeing his point of view, at the same time, you're not seeing his face. You're not being able to connect with him how he is seeing. Like in Silence of the Lambs, how the camera was set up to always view people from Clarice's point of view. And this film, it really adjusts that and changes that, so you aren't fully able to see Michael's point of view and fully understand it or comprehend it.
I find that really interesting that the director commented that, because we were talking earlier about how Michael is not supposed to be seen as human. So I feel like even if we could see his face, we would still feel that we shouldn't be able to read his emotion. And I would still feel that based on what they say about him, there's no human behind the eyes, you know, what Dr. Loomis says. I would think that his facial expression would remain blank, but also it almost goes against what the director says about him being human, because if you can relate to somebody, you relate to the humanness of them through expression. So I thought maybe the actor would have chosen maybe not to make an expression, but kind of an interesting thing I thought about when you said that.
So in the one scene where Michael Myers' mask comes off, he has just that. He has a blank face. There's no emotion whatsoever. I mean, this is like, you would imagine the person who is in the position that he was in to express some sort of emotion relating to the event. There is absolutely no emotion. I don't know, maybe this is just myself seeing this, but his face, when he takes off his mask, looks very close to what the mask looks like.
Yes, I could see that. I could see that a little bit.
The fact that they both are fairly expressionless, I would say, I can definitely see that.
And I think that kind of goes into another common theme within the film, is this embodiment of fear within Michael, and how often he's referred to as the boogeyman or like the devil and things like that. How he literally is this embodiment of all of your fears. He is this being, because he's a human being. He isn't quite human. I mean, I don't know any humans that can get stabbed 6 dozen times, get shot, and still live. I don't have those superpowers. Most people, I don't think, do. But just the way that he is kind of a personification of the devil or the boogeyman, I think is a very interesting concept.
That kind of relates to the quote where Tommy says, "You can't kill the boogeyman." I mean, this is somebody who has been stabbed, who has been shot, who has been all the things that would immediately kill a person, or at least eventually kill a person. He can't be killed. And that's like a supernatural concept, is like, you can't kill something that can't die.
Right, which goes into, again, just that strange notion of, we talked about, okay, so maybe he doesn't have a mental illness, but he is just pure evil. But at the same time, I think that also goes into what I was saying about, you know, this movie plays up on our fear we have as children. So, you know, the masks and parents not being around, now something that can't die. Also, when we're talking about common tropes in horror movies, looking at the final girl trope, which we joke about last time, me being final girl vibes, that's hilarious. I don't know. Maybe I could hold my own. I'll see. So,
I think you could hold your own. You hopefully should be able to do that. I think you have major final Girl vibes.
After all of the horror movies I have watched, I hope that I have some sense. I mean, when I'm watching them, I'm like, what are they doing? So anyway, I know that, you know a lot about that topic, Ashley, so I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, so another fun fact, because I am full of them. Ashley fun fact. Hashtag Ashley fun fact.
I love it.
The final girl, or the idea or concept of the final girl, many film studies critics, historians, give Halloween the credit of coming up with this final girl trope, which I think is extremely interesting because you see that in so many horror films moving forward, which is another interesting thing. Some critics of this movie, Halloween, and other slasher movies say that the final girl doesn't survive due to her resourcefulness or intuition, but due to luck. And in this case, they say that Laurie is finally rescued by a man, Dr. Loomis, in the end. However, some feminist scholars, such as Carol J. Clover, argue that despite the violence against women in Halloween and other slasher films, these films are what turned women into heroines. In many pre-Halloween horror films, women are depicted as helpless victims and aren't safe until they're rescued by a strong masculine hero. And yes, despite the fact that Loomis technically saves Laurie, Clover asserts that Halloween initiates the role of the final girl who ultimately triumphs in the end. Laurie fights back against Mike Myers and severely wounds him several times. Had Myers been a normal man, Laurie's attacks would have killed him. Even Loomis, the male hero of the story, who shoots Michael repeatedly with a revolver, cannot kill him. It is Laurie who saves herself long enough in order to find someone else who can be there to help battle him with her, not for her.
Commenting off of that, it's interesting because I'm just sort of forming this thought as we're having this discussion, but I love that secondary view, the view that you just said from the feminist scholars. Part of me, though, also while we're talking about this, is resenting, and this might get me some criticism, but it's sort of resenting the whole idea of the final girl, because it makes it seem like just one smart girl will survive. Why not many girls? We had one girl in this film. The other girls didn't even bother fighting back. It was laughable. We're like, oh, please stop. No, Laurie, yes, she did fight back. She had her dumb moments, in my opinion. Like, you don't just turn your back on somebody you stabbed once and just be like, whew, well, that's over. But I thought, just as you're talking, the idea of the final girl is almost a little bit insulting, because why just the one final girl? I don't get it. I don't really like that trope, because that too is problematic to me in other ways. I love that this started the trend of strong female survivors, but I still think there are so many problems in horror movies where the women, like just the one girl who can get away because of her smarts. There are a lot of smart women out there, and to just have that one, I think we can work on that, guys and women. I think we really can.
To kind of go off of that, I think this movie really misses the point of the 33 rules of Zombieland. Rule number 2, always double tap. Always double tap. If Laurie would have just maybe stabbed him one more time while he was down, maybe he would have stayed down. I mean, he got shot 6 times, so maybe not. But rule number 2, to survive a horror movie, to survive anything, always double tap.
Yes, love it. And
or decapitation.
Or decapitation.
But that might get you sent to jail, so maybe avoid it, but like think about it. Unless he's gonna reattach his head because he's a zombie.
I don't think he's doing that.
Okay, I do have a question though about that. Does decapitation mean you're going to prison? Not that I've ever been there or done that, but for future reference. No, just kidding.
My thing is,
okay,
I don't know because I've never decapitated somebody.
Well, I don't stand on it, but I'm just wondering. It sparked my curiosity.
I feel like if you, and I don't know, if you were in these situations and you were so dissociated and you were trying to do everything in your being to have this person be dead and stay dead, that might happen at the minimum slashing of the throat to the point where it was borderline decapitation. And like, obviously this is very morbid and none of us are gonna be decapitating anybody, but if you're thinking about it,
Darn it, my Friday night plans for next week are derailed.
yeah, sorry about that. But I feel like if you're in the state of trauma where you are so out of reality, I feel like that is possibly an outcome that could happen, but not likely.
I just want to say, if anyone here is ever in a situation like a scary movie where someone's attacking you, don't be like Judith Myers and just grab your boobs and say, oh my goodness, no, Michael, what are you doing? That's not going to help you. That's so unrealistic. I'm sorry. If I think I'm being attacked, the last thing I'm going to do is grab my boobs. I'm just saying.
And from a 6-year-old, you could totally, just biologically, physically, she could have taken him out. And she's here grabbing her boobs. Like, what?
Yeah, the issue that I have with that, one of the many issues I have with this movie.
I was going to say one issue.
Okay, we'll get to this later on, my issues that I have with this movie. But in this scene regarding his sister, that boy stabs so slow. Who do you know that does anything that slow when they're trying to cut something? No one. He was taking his sweet time. And this poor girl, and I never want to victim shame or anything like that, but this girl, she could have just pushed this boy down, you know? She could have exerted enough force to get him away or at least escape from the situation.
The boy probably cut faster with his Crayola scissors in first grade. I mean,
I'm pretty short. I'm 5'2". I mean, a 6-year-old, depending upon how tall they are, can be maybe taller to me. But nonetheless, I'm not strong, but I still think I could push over a 6-year-old.
I hope so.
I think so. I don't want to.
I love my nephew. My nephew is 6 years old. I love him
I could
so much.
totally kick him across the yard. I love
Please
Nathan.
don't
He's
do
so
that. I was
sweet.
gonna say I love Nathan too. Let's
He's
not do
so
that.
sweet.
But love you, Nathan. Love you. But yes, I mean, just if we're looking off of stature, I would hope that one of us could physically overtake a 6-year-old.
I redact my statement on that because I used to work in a daycare and I was I was attacked by multiple 6-year-olds who
I'm sorry, this is new information for all of us. Please explain.
No. I saw this happen multiple times, and I'm a horrible friend because I would just laugh at you, but I saw it happen multiple times.
I'm blinking spastically right now.
Yeah. Well, there was a lot of, let me tell you, kids are creative and they have the worst excuses for everything, but they will give it to you like they know what's up. But children on multiple occasions have tried to attack me. And I don't know why, because
you're just a freaking delight. I don't know why they do that.
Right? I know I want to have kids. I love kids. I love being around them. Why? Why me? What did I do?
You're just like Judith Myers. You're just an easy target.
Apparently so.
I'm just going to be nicer and say that you were just too nice, but
I'm
Ashley
kidding.
just kind of went with that and rolled with it.
I'm teasing.
You went there.
I went there. I'm teasing.
That's pretty funny, Bella. I honestly never knew that about you, and it makes me question the whole kids thing in the future. Also, kids can be possessed, and as I have said in the past, under certain circumstances, I have said, I don't think I could ever possess somebody because I have too many morals, and I stick by that standard.
That is a good, those are good morals to have. I truly that you should.
Shannon for president 2020. I won't possess you.
You know what? That's a presidential campaign I can get behind.
I mean, come on. I think it would work.
Not to get political or anything.
Yeah, not to get political, but I think I'd be a great president.
Yeah.
So I think it's probably about that time to get into how we rate this movie, what we think about it. Bella, how about you go first? Because you have very strong opinions on this movie.
I have a lot of issues with this movie, and I'm sure there are many people out there that are going to be personally offended. They're going to say, how dare you make these comments? But this is my podcast, not yours. So I'm going to give this movie 4.5 crowns out of 10. Now, Let me defend myself. Did you know that in one scene where Bob and Linda are leaving after making the most disturbing comment of the movie, they leave the van door open? There is a scene where Jamie Lee Curtis comes back and that van door is closed. There are so many hiccups in this movie that I can't get on board with. I just can't. The acting is bad. It's bad.
I do agree. And again, I see the merit of this film. I love it in its own way, but it's almost like a parody.
Yeah, I mean, nobody ever turns on a light switch. They're all automatically incapable of turning on the lights.
So I have to say a little note on that. I'll get into this in my fun facts. They had a very low budget for this film. So the main reason why half the film is filmed in darkness is because they didn't have the budget to turn on the lights.
Oh, I thought it was because they didn't have the budget to hire anybody who could work a light switch.
No,
Meanwhile, this was the crusade for future horror films, and it's because their budget was so GD low.
And now all of the
God.
movies are dark.
Yeah, I mean, there are just like some things that make no sense whatsoever. Why did he take the headstone? Why did he put it on the bed?
I do
Where
have
did
something for that.
strength come from?
Mm-hmm.
And how does he know how to drive? And better than me.
I wasn't going to say that, but...
Don't look at my car and all of the little scratches on it. I don't want to explain it.
There are people who have given some sort of rationale or reasoning behind his driving, but I'm not going to entertain those here because they seem a little silly to me. You can look them up yourselves, form your own opinion.
I do want to say the headstone thing goes back into the sexually promiscuous thing from what I can interpret, because he started off with why he does this, what problems he has going on because of the whole sexually promiscuous teen thing. Takes his sister's headstone, puts it on the bed with a sexually promiscuous teenager because he was demonizing his sister as well. So that's what I get from that. But I do have to say it's very strange, and like, how does he do that on his own? It's very, very, very heavy.
He must be working out in the facility. That's all I have. Like,
Probably all he can do.
he be lifting.
He's probably pretty hot under that mask and that exterior. I'm just kidding. That was a
From
terrible
the
joke.
neck down.
I may edit that out later.
So, Shannon, what is your rating of this film?
This is a tough one. I do think, I don't know. I guess I'd give it 6 stars. Or, I'm sorry, 6 crowns. Because maybe 6.5 crowns. Okay, I'll give it 6.5. Only because it is a classic, but I think we hold on to it being a classic because of just the fact that it's an older movie, and I don't think that should make it a classic. I think there are a lot of horror movies that are better done. I do see the merit in that it has sparked a lot of other movies from this movie, and I love Jamie Lee Curtis, but I do think there are a lot of problems with it. So I do give it a 6.5 crowns, but that's for me on the lower scale. But I do, again, merit that it is valuable in certain ways.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And the one thing I will say is that Rob Zombie apparently said that this was the second best or like second most iconic film, one being Psycho.
Yeah.
And so I'll give it, I'll say 5 now, only because I love Rob Zombie. He is a vegan. He is
He's vegan?
Him and his wife are vegan. Yes. Shout out to all my vegans out there.
To me, that is ironic, and I love it.
I know, because all the gore.
Mm-hmm.
But
I love irony. Irony is one of my favorite elements of literature, so I'll take it.
So I also am going to give it a 6.5 to 7 crowns. While I have my issues with some of the things of the film, I also, being a film studies minor and an avid lover of all things film history, the amount of tropes and things that this film started is absolutely incredible, to the point where people our age will go back and watch this film for the first time and find it almost cheesy or corny because they're like, well, they use this trope, they use that trope, they use all these things that are commonplace in scary movies now, without realizing that they created those. They created the trope of the final girl. They created so many of these different ideals that are used in horror movies moving forward even today. So while I do see a lot of different issues, especially with the monsterization of mental illness, and there's just so many boobs. I'm not against boobs. There's just so many unnecessary boobs. I'm sorry.
Unnecessary is keyword. In my opinion, like the body can be used artistically in film, but in horror movies, that's rarely used artistically.
Hashtag unnecessary boobs.
With a Z at the end instead of an S.
Yes, boobs, Boobz.
See?
So, yeah, you had a 6.5 to 7. And with that, if it's all right, I have some fun facts to share with you guys.
Love it. I love the fun facts. I'm so here for the fun facts.
So, fun fact number 1, the budget of Halloween was $300,000, which sounds like a lot of money, but in reality, even obviously in today's time, that's nothing for a film budget, but even back then, it really wasn't all that much. So all of the actors ended up wearing all of their own clothes since they didn't have a money for a costume department. Jamie Lee Curtis actually went to J.C. Penney and bought all of Laurie's wardrobe, and she spent less than $100 for the entire film on her wardrobe, which I thought was very interesting.
I find that fascinating because I noticed, and I love that style. Like, it's funny because they make a comment when Annie is wearing like this big flannelly kind of, I think it's actually more of a not gaucho. What are those things called? The shawls kind of, I don't remember.
Poncho?
Poncho.
Shout out to
Oh my
Morgan.
gosh. Yes. Came back in 7th grade for us. But yeah, she's wearing this like plaid poncho and this button down, and Lori goes, wow, like you're really dressed up, or makes some kind of comment about it. And I'm like, I love dressing like my grandpa, honestly, when fall hits. That's my favorite time of year. One time I came downstairs and like I was in a flannel and my grandpa and I both matched. And I'm a big flannel girl. So I was thrilled actually.
I love that.
I love that too. I shout out to Grandpa Ernie. But anyway, so he probably isn't listening. It's fine. But anyway, that's fascinating to me because I actually like Lori's style, but I thought it was purposeful because she dresses with the button down, and I thought it was supposed to make her look more masculine.
Yeah, I thought that was very interesting as well. The next fun fact is this movie is obviously supposed to take place in October in Illinois, but the movie was actually shot in early spring in Southern California. So the crew had to go out and buy paper fall leaves from a decorator and paint them. Well, they're fall leaves or just leaves in general, but painted them to more of the color that they wanted them and scattered them about the filming locations. And then to save money, after they finished filming that scene, they collected all of the leaves and would reuse them for other scenes. That is like as low budget as it gets.
And I would absolutely believe you because I noticed, I was like, if you are from the Midwest or East Coast, the trees do not look like that at all by October 31st. They're definitely changing. And I thought somebody's up there scattering something, some kinds of leaves down from the trees.
Right. So at 10 minutes, 31 seconds in the film, when the nurse is kind of cowering in the car, you see Michael's hand come down and it smashes the car window. If you look really closely, you can see a crescent wrench is placed flat against his palm and his arm. It's painted flesh color. They did that to ensure that he could break the windshield when he slapped it. I went back and I watched this. You can totally see it. Like it's 100% there. It's something I was just like, oh, okay, interesting.
Now I'm going to go back and watch that scene.
Right? So, next fun fact, the music for the film is written and performed by John Carpenter. And instead of being credited to him, they gave the credit to the Bowling Green Philharmonic Orchestra, which ironically is very interesting because John Carpenter grew up in Bowling Green, Kentucky, which fun fact about me, I have family in Bowling Green, Kentucky, so shout out to my Bowling Green family. But he wrote this music for the film in 4 days, which I think is crazy.
Wow, no, I read that, and going off of that fun fact, I read that people had seen the movie, before it was released and said, this isn't scary at all. And then he created that film score, and they were like, okay, this is terrifying.
So the original script was titled The Babysitter Murders, and it had the events of all the murders take place over several days. But it was a budgetary decision to change the script and have everything happen on the same day. It helped reduce the number of costume changes, locations filmed, things like that. And they decided to call it Halloween because it was the scariest night of the year, and it ended up being the perfect title and time frame for this movie to take place.
Cool.
Another
I do
fun-
think Halloween is maybe not, well, I guess it could be the spookiest time of the year, but definitely the best time of the year.
So John Carpenter considered the hiring of Jamie Lee Curtis as the ultimate tribute to Alfred Hitchcock, who had given her mother, Janet Leigh, legendary status in Psycho. How cool is that,
Oh
right?
my gosh.
So, what's kind of ironic is during that same period, Universal Studio producers were trying to get Jamie Lee Curtis in the new production of Psycho 2. But if you go onto Jamie Lee Curtis's social media and things like that, she often will reference her mom and other women in Hitchcock's film as a really common trope called Hitchcock's blondes. So I think that was a really interesting concept of Jamie Lee Curtis having that relation and this being her debut film in a horror movie that was, in my mind, just as iconic as Psycho. And Psycho is one of my favorite movies, just saying.
I think that's cool.
And my final fun fact is the entire story and premise of Halloween is based on an experience that John Carpenter had in college while touring a psychiatric hospital. He met a child who stared at him, as he says, with a look of evil that absolutely terrified him.
I don't know how I feel about John. I think
Yeah.
that's really interesting, but that makes me kind of dislike John Carpenter, honestly, just because I think that's super insensitive, and he was just a kid, and now it made this Michael Myers character exist, which I love. I love Halloween, but that's just kind of disappointing to me.
Yeah, no, I can understand that completely.
And that there was like a financial benefit off of that interaction.
Mm-hmm.
Good point.
And to end it all, I thought that it was very interesting that the Myers house was an actual abandoned house that they actually had to go in and clean out to use as what would be used as an abandoned house.
That's
so
funny.
crazy.
And
so
kind of
interesting,
ironic.
right? Like, you wouldn't think about having to clean up an abandoned house to make it look like an abandoned house, but
About that budget. It's all about that.
oh, that budget.
True. That's a funny. I love that. That's a good way to end the episode, Bella.
Oh, and with that, that's our review on Halloween. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Be sure to join us in 2 weeks for our next episode, which features a highly controversial film within the horror genre that happens to be one of our favorites. We find it particularly disturbing, haunting, and quite thought-provoking. Stay tuned on our social media to find some more hints and see if you can guess which movie we're reviewing next.
Please keep supporting us and letting us know what you think of our episodes. We highly encourage you to reach out to us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Facebook, we are The Stephen Queens, and Stephen is Stephen per our horror master, Stephen King. On Instagram, we're at The Stephen Queens. And on Twitter, we're at Stephen_Queens. Please make sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And please, please, please like and review and comment. Let us know what you think. We really want to hear your feedback.
All right. Thanks for tuning in. This is Bella.
This is Shannon.
And this is Ashley. Stay creepy.